Hi, everyone. Uh, Welcome to day two of the training um, for the Journey of Life Psychosocial Support Intervention. Today, we're going to be talking about implementation science. So, uh, I think you guys already did an icebreaker, but I'll start. My name's Justin. I am uh, I guess I'm called like a team leader or something. Uh, Basically, I'm like a consultant. I help Flora um, lead the study. I have some expertise in, among other things, implementation science. Um, and my favorite fruit actually is, um, I think would also say mangoes. I was talking about this with Flora, but maybe also pineapples. I don't know if they have those in Uganda, but I like them. I like tropical fruits. So if you haven't had a chance to do an icebreaker, Gary, please pause and lead it. Um, I'll give you a minute, and otherwise, I'm going to start into the study or today's slides. So today's training objectives. By the end of today's training, participants will be able to understand the term implementation science, discuss the implementation of Journey of Life, and understand some key interview questions, right? What we'll be asking about, what we're hoping to learn about. Our expectations, I think you went over these yesterday, but timeliness. Everyone, please participate, make this active, engaging. You'll remember it better. It'll be more interesting and fun, and also, better use of everyone's time. Please communicate, ask questions if you're not sure, um, collaborate, work together. This is a team effort. Be inclusive, and respectful of others. Um, and, I think this could be an exciting project. So hopefully you all feel this way. So first, we're going to talk about implementation science. That's what I'm going to introduce. And then Flora is going to go more into depth about, forming questions as well as strategies. Um, and then, yesterday, just review what we talked about. What is research, right? You went into the scientific method, kind of some background for what we're doing here. I talked about ethics in a couple of different presentations. And hopefully that provided some good understanding what you'll be doing, some context for what you're working on, and now a little bit more of that today with implementation science. So implementation science is kind of a hot field right now in terms of research. So what is it? What do people mean? And these qualitative interviews, I think, are going to be focused on implementation science. So what is implementation science? Implementation science. So an intervention that we're researching, I think that's something you can think about as the thing, right? Like the Journey of Life intervention is a thing, right? Um, but there's other things, right? There's other interventions, even simpler, right? Because Journey of Life, I think, is like a multi-day, component session with people from the community, led by, sometimes social workers, sometimes others. Um, you can see there's a lot of different ways that could actually happen or take place. It's interactive, right? Mm, But that's the thing in this case, right? But another case, the thing might just be like hand washing, right? Or taking a pill every day to prevent something, right? And so effectiveness research, right, what you learned about yesterday kind of is looking at whether or not that thing works, right? So like in some case, like you have a randomized trial, right, where some people receive it and some people don't. You follow them both and you see how each person does, right? And if it's truly random, the assignment, the only difference between those people, if you get enough people, is whether or not they got the thing, right? And that lets you say, okay, we think that thing works, right? There's other things we can study that you can't do that with, right? Like smoking, right? We can't make some people smoke and others not. right? So those you just have to watch people. But in other cases, you can actually offer it, right? Like with Journey of Life, I think there's some evidence showing it works, right? But will it work in Kirandongo? Would it work in other humanitarian settings? These are questions that we want to ask. Um, but then implementation research goes sort of beyond looking at whether thing works and looks at how best to help people or places do that thing, right? To offer Journey of Life or deliver it or implement it, you could say, right? So implementation strategies are the stuff we do to try to help people or places do the thing, right? So the main implementation outcomes are how much and how well they do the thing, right? So one thing people talk about is fidelity, right? Are they implementing the thing, Journey of Life or hand washing, the way it's supposed to, right? Were people washing their hands long enough? Were they doing it at the right time that they said they would, right? Like before they ate or after they went to the bathroom, right? Um, and so that's what we're studying with implementation, because we want to not only learn about whether or not it works, but also how to get people to do it and do it the way you're supposed to, that we know was the way that it worked, right? um, just like, my kids wash their hands and they have to sing the whole alphabet, right? Whereas if you just run your hands under some water, get it wet, and then run off, that's not the same thing, right? And maybe it doesn't work the same way. So in this case, our study, what is the thing we're interested in? And maybe we can talk about that now. Maybe I will pause it and Gary can get into that if you haven't already, or if not, maybe it can be a discussion. Like, what exactly is Journey of Life? What are these different sessions? What is the thing here, Because the next step is to, do some implementation research around whether it works or how you get it to work. And so, an implementation science, it's a field, right? And it takes place in the context of stuff, right? So, oftentimes, things start with basic science, like in a laboratory, like a medicine, right? Like with coronavirus, right? They found the spike protein, they isolated it, they able to get the genetic information about it, and then in a laboratory they can start to play with it and see, like, how can we stop this from binding with an immune body cell, or how can we deactivate this thing, right? And from that they developed a vaccine, right? And then they had to run trials, right, with people, with volunteers. At first, I think it's small numbers just to see whether it's safe. They're not really looking at whether it works, but they're also maybe collecting something about whether you generate an immune response. And then after that, after it's shown like, hey, this works, it's like, well, can this work in a big group of people and actually prevent the disease, prevent people from getting coronavirus? And then, and that takes you into this third stage, right? Then you're getting into the effectiveness trials, right? But then how do you actually get people to take the coronavirus? How do you get it rolled out and spread out to everyone, right? How do you scale it up so that everyone has that? And then you're getting into the implementation science world, right? Like, it's really just whether or not it works. That's efficacy. And everything else is really implementation science. So that's why this is such an important field, is because people were realizing that, like, hey, things get stuck here. We can spend a lot of money doing research and doing things really rigorously and say, hey, we can show this thing works. It was efficacious in a small controlled setting. And then, maybe even a little bit wider scaled up, but not out there in the population getting into everyday practice, right? So things were dying here, right? They weren't making into this stage and getting implemented and scaled up and disseminated, right? So we're spending all this money finding out if things work, but then not spending enough money or focus getting people to actually use them. And the other problem with that is there was this huge gap, right? It would take 17 years for it to get that first black box all the way out into practice, right? From being in the lab versus not. And so, like, in the case of coronavirus, like, that wasn't acceptable, right? And all these resources were pulled in to getting that vaccine developed, right? And so they took it from from the bench to the vaccine in like 10 months, right? And now the big challenge is how long will it take, to get all this stuff to scale up and that, because outside of like a pandemic setting like that, you'll see like, you know, otherwise it was taking 17 years on average. And so we're trying to get that, some of that study about what happens after something works, after we know Journey of Life works. How can we find out how it's being implemented and how well they're doing it, and what determines whether or not people would actually use it or integrate it into their services or into their lives, right, into their communities. So that's what implementation science is at its core. And then Flora is going to go into a lot more depth about that. So I just want to introduce that. Hopefully you guys have another great day of training, and I'm going to leave it there. Take care.